In this video, I'm going to walk through how to set up a Citrix Linux Virtual desktop from scratch. We'll start by setting up a CentOS virtual machine, getting the machine updated to the latest build, installing the Citrix VDA, setting up how we want to deliver virtual desktops, and then demo connecting through Citrix to our first Linux virtual desktop session. To get started, I have just spun up a VM off of a CentOS ISO, and we'll go through the configuration here on how to get this machine installed. A few basic steps: picking a host name, which we'll change later, just setting a time zone, root password for restore, how we want to install it. In our case, we have a blank disk, so we're going to use all. As far as what we're installing, remember to choose desktop, as we need a graphical operating system in order to connect to a virtual desktop. And then go ahead and start the install. We fast forward through it here, but it'll take a few minutes in your case. And then when this machine boots back up, we'll begin our configuration of CentOS here. So we will create a local user just to log into this machine. Date and time can be set later. We're going to synchronize it with a domain controller. And then this machine is ready to be rebooted again, and we'll be able to log into it for the first time. Once the machine's up and we log in this case, CentOS comes up with the network detached by default. And since we need to join it to our domain, get an IP address and all that, we'll connect the network and then actually go into the system settings to correct it so that it will automatically connect the network at boot. Which requires the root password that we set earlier. And there we go. The next thing we're going to do, which is a good practice for at least the correct version of the VDA, is just update this machine. Again, pay attention to the version of the Citrix Linux VDA you've downloaded and make sure that an update is not going to push you to a release that's different than the build you downloaded. In this case, we know the update will get us to the correct build. Since this is running on Zen server, we also need to install the VM tools. So once the update's done, we're going to go ahead and complete that. You can just mount the tools in and then just run install.sh, and that will actually require you to reboot. With our machine updated and our VM tools installed, we'll go ahead and log into this machine again. At this point, I'm just going to copy our Linux VDA package onto the VM. I'm using WinSCP to copy it from another Windows machine on my network onto this Linux VM. And once your VDA is copied over, we can go ahead and run the installer. And here, as you can see, we're actually going to use the yum local install command and then the RPM. And notice what this is doing is it's going to install the Linux VDA RPM, but it's also going to install all the necessary prerequisites. Once the VDA and all the prerequisites are installed, we can run the easy setup or easy install script at ctxinstall.sh. You can see this is going to guide us through the steps we need to configure it. It's also going to configure some of the prerequisite packages and some of the other packages necessary to make the Citrix Linux Virtual Desktop operate, things like the PostgreSQL And then the configurations. Again, the host name is configured at install. We have a chance to change it here. What we want to do with DNS, NTP, we will point at our Windows domain controller. And then keep in mind we have to join a domain for Citrix Linux Virtual Desktop. In this case, we're going to use Winbind, so I put in the realm and the domain. Domain is typically the shortnet BIOS name, and realm is the all caps long name of the domain. It'll ask me to confirm everything I've put in is correct. Once I do, it will configure the host name, the DNS, the NTP, and it'll attempt to join Active Directory, which of course requires a password, which I'll punch in, and you can see join domain successfully. At this point, the VDA is installed, and it's joined to our domain, but we need to add it to our Citrix environment so it becomes part of a machine catalog and a delivery group. In this case, I'm using Citrix Cloud and the XenApp and XenDesktop service using the Xen server environment the machine is on as a resource location. The process would be identical for an on-premise environment. So to add a Linux machine, I'll pick Server OS. So this will be a multi-user environment. Another servicer. This is manually provisioned, as we've seen. I will pick the host name that I just assigned that VM as part of the CTX install setup. Set the VDA version to 7.9 or later, as it is the latest build of the VDA at this time. And I'll just give my machine catalog a name, given the build of the machine, which is CentOS 6.8. Once the machine catalog is done, we'll go ahead and create a delivery group for this Linux machine. We'll select the machine we just added, leave the user management to Citrix Cloud in this case, or you could assign your users at this stage and give it the same name as the catalog. So now we have a delivery group set up for our Linux desktop. And again, I didn't assign users because I have it set up for Citrix Cloud to manage the user mapping to the delivery groups, which we will look at later. But at this point, we'll say yes, we have assigned it in Studio, and we'll continue with the configuration. At this point, we will put in a DDC that we're going to connect to. In my case, it's a cloud connector. In an on-prem environment, it would be the host name of your DDCs. I'm using standard port 80. I'm going to register the services at start. I'm going to add the firewall rules. I'm using Winbind as my AD tool. I'm not using 3D Pro. I am not using VDI mode. And I'm not going to set search parameters for LDAP. Once I've punched in my values, you can see my configuration is complete. Now that it's completed, the services should be running and that machine should be ready to accept users. My last step using Citrix Cloud is to assign users to that delivery group. So through Citrix Cloud, I'll go into my library. I will find the delivery groups I've defined, and I'll go ahead and add my users to a workspace. Okay, with that done, we can log in and kind of give this our first test. So I'll log in as one of my domain users. As you can see, I now have a desktop called a CentOS 6.8, which is what I named my delivery group. And as I go ahead and launch that machine, up comes my CentOS Linux Virtual desktop running through Citrix, and we'll just bring up the Firefox browser here to prove it really is a Linux Virtual desktop.